Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another Question the Narrative video, and this one is going to be a little bit different because I'm going to be recounting some of my personal experiences with shadow men, quote, ghosts, and what I believe to be demonic activity. Now, first of all, I have to say that I am not going to be approaching this in the typical way as ghosts being the spirits of deceased loved ones, because that is not what I believe ghosts to be. I also want to just put it out there that I think that a lot of times we as Christians drop the ball when it comes to the so-called supernatural or paranormal. And actually, I have to say that I believe, as Timothy Alberino does, that just because we don't understand it doesn't mean that it's outside of normal or that it's almost magical. It is still very normal. It is still a part of the world. It's just that something that we don't understand. But as a believer, I have countless times heard other Christians say that there are no such thing as ghosts, and they just ended the discussion there. And unfortunately, that really makes Christianity in general lose credibility when so many people refuse to address what so many people have experienced, including other Christians. I think that it's very important, though, that we try to keep this biblical, and we try to just remember that we as humans don't have the answers to everything. And that's something that I say here all the time. I don't have the answers to everything. I just ask questions when they pop up in my curiosity. So, you might be wondering what I think ghosts are. I'm sure that you probably already know. Just as with a lot of the alien phenomena, I believe that ghosts are demonically related. I believe that a lot of times they are masquerading as deceased people or as deceased loved ones in a way to deceive us, to make us think that there is some sort of life after death that is different than what the Bible tells us. That doesn't mean, though, that these activities are not real, that these things don't happen. What it means, though, is that they are coming from an entirely different place. And I'm just going to talk to you about the things that I have experienced in my life because there have been several instances that have happened to me. I'm also going to mention that the whole line of thinking that comes with my Question the Narrative series. I have actually been interested in these sorts of things since I was a child. So I was always drawn to the very things that I talk about. And so I think that a lot of times my mind is already open. And so what I hear is that a lot of times we are the type of people who do have more of these experiences. I don't know if it's true, but I'm just going to start off with saying that. So, my very first experience that I remember was as a child. I was probably about 6 or 7. I was at an aunt and uncle's house, and I went upstairs just to use the bathroom, and their hallway was dark outside of the bathroom. And I came out, and I was standing at the top of the stairs, and all of a sudden, I saw this dark shadow, a small dark shadow at my feet. And I'm going to say this was the only thing that I could find. It didn't look like this. It was very amorphous. It didn't have much of a shape at all, but it was small and dark, and it was at my feet, and it actually scared me so badly that I fell down the stairs. And I remember my aunt and uncle telling me that it must have been their dog Fuzzy, when in fact their dog Fuzzy was white. Several years later, many years later, actually, I was in my early 20s. I was working as a cleaning supervisor for the electric company. And I always used to feel very uneasy on certain floors. I always used to feel like someone was watching me, especially on this one floor. And the way that they named it was called N5. And it's because the building that it was in was called the North Building, and it was the fifth floor. So N5 was the name of the floor. And every time that I would go on there to inspect at night, I would constantly have the hair just raising up on the back of my neck because I always felt like someone else was there with me. And in fact, I used to have some of my cleaners used to tell me that they were afraid of that floor because they always felt that something was watching them. So the one night, as I was inspecting this floor, it was being renovated. So there really wasn't much on there, just a lot of empty bookcases, really, that had nothing on them. But I still used to have to go and I would weave in and out of all of the rows, just to make sure the dusting was done and vacuuming because they still had to get cleaned every day. And as I was going through one of the aisles, I felt this whoosh down the back of my head and something slammed on the floor behind me. I turned around and looked, and there was a 3-ring binder on the floor behind me. And I picked it up to put it back because I figured that I must have bumped it off of one of the bookcases. And then as I took a look around, I realized that none of the bookshelves were high enough that I should have felt the whoosh down my head. They were all probably about lower than shoulder level to me. So there's no way that I should have felt that. And in fact, I didn't remember bumping anything to begin with, but that's what I automatically assumed. My experiences with that floor, though, did not end there, but that certainly didn't help me with the creepiness factor that that floor already had. It was another night very similar to that one. Not the same night, though, but I remember that when I used to inspect that floor, there were a set of lights in the back of the floor and then a set of lights at the front of the floor. And so as I would inspect, I would go down one half of the floor, and once I would get down to the back, I would turn off those lights. So then the back half of the floor would be completely dark, but I would leave the front half on until I got up to the front because I certainly didn't want to be in the dark there. So I did that like I did on a lot of other nights, just weaving through the aisles, got to the back, and I turned those lights off. The back half of the floor where I was at got dark. And as I was coming around the corner, I heard footsteps. And I really didn't think anything of it because whenever I used to be out on my inspections, security guards used to have to make their rounds too. So a lot of times I would run into security guards. So as I rounded the corner in the back here where it was dark, now this is not the floor, this is just like stock footage, but it was very similar to this. So as I rounded the corner and heard these footsteps, I saw this tall, dark shadow of a man. And yeah, it looked very similar to this, including the hat. And at first, I was so used to just seeing security guards that just I automatically said, "Oh my God, you scared me." And then I looked away and looked back, and it was gone. There was no one there on the floor with me. So at first, it didn't hit me what really happened. So I kept inspecting the floor, and then all of a sudden, then I realized, oh my gosh, I actually just saw a shadow of a man. And I bolted to the front of the floor. I didn't even finish inspecting the rest of it. And I went right down to our office. And my mom was actually my boss. And I said to her, Mom, I said, you're not going to believe this, but I saw a tall, dark shadow of a man. And she said to me, were you on N5? And I said to her, how did you know that? And she said, oh, because I saw that years ago. And I said to her, Mom, why did you never say anything to me about this? And she said she didn't want to scare me. So, yeah, my mom had seen the same thing and graciously decided not to tell me. And so I have to say that I was telling everyone about it. I didn't care. I just told everyone. I was talking to the security guards about it. And I didn't tell the cleaners though at first. I think the security guards might have leaked it to them though. But pretty soon, even the office employees of the electric company had heard what happened to me. So it was really going around. I never thought of looking into it, but some of the security guards did, and they claimed that they checked to see if anyone had ever died on that floor. Because again, I don't think that's what it would have been anyway, but at the time I was not a believer yet. I was not a Christian yet, at least not a born again Christian yet. I was a nominal Christian at this point. And yeah, they said no one ever died here, and I thought, "Oh, okay. Well, I don't know, but I definitely know what I saw." But now looking back on it, it doesn't matter if no one died on that floor because I don't believe that it was a disembodied spirit of a human being anyway. I believe that these shadow men are demonically related. So fast forward a few years, it was probably about 7 or 8 years later. Oh, I do have to mention that after that happened, I would not go on that floor to inspect at night for the longest time by myself. I used to make my mom come up with me and inspect the floor with me. And then when I finally did start inspecting the floor, I used to tell my mom, I am not turning those lights off. And I did not. And it really probably took me about 6 months before I was able to do it again. And even then, I was terrified. So yeah. Anyway, so then about nothing really happened once I stopped working there. So nothing happened to me after that until we moved into this house. And I was pregnant with my fifth child at the time, the one who's getting married in July. I was pregnant with her. And I remember that we got home the one night from a party, and my oldest daughter was about 5 at the time, and we walked into the house and she said to me, "Mommy, who said that?" And I said, "Said what?" And she said that she had heard someone say, "Welcome back." I found it a little creepy, but sometimes children think that they hear things. And nothing at that point, I usually was able to have like to sense something when something was off somewhere. And up until that point, I had never felt anything wrong with this house. But that was really the beginning of when things really started happening in that house. So at that point, my three oldest children, we were not homeschooling yet. So my three oldest children were in school, and my youngest child at the time was about 2.5. And while the children were at school, I put my 2.5-year-old daughter into her crib for her nap, and her bedroom was on the third floor, and she shared it with her 5-year-old sister, who, like I said, wasn't home. I put her in her crib to take her nap, and I went downstairs. And just a while later, I don't remember why I went back up to check on her. I heard her. I don't remember if she was crying. I don't remember if she was just being noisy. I just know that I went upstairs to check on her. And when I got up there, the dollhouse that had been sitting in the center of the floor when I put her in her crib was now in the crib with her. There was no possible way that my 2.5-year-old daughter was going to be able to climb out of her crib, get a dollhouse, somehow pick it up, put it in her crib, and then climb back into the crib again. I assure you, if my 2.5-year-old would have climbed out of the crib, she would not have been going back in there. She would have been running around. Yet I went up there, and there her dollhouse was in the crib with her. Not long after that, I mean, it was a different day. It might have been a couple of weeks later. Again, my other children were at school. My 2.5-year-old was taking her nap. And I remember that I decided to lie down in my room on my bed because I was tired. And as I was lying there, I was lying on my stomach and I felt someone touch my back. And again, my daughter was in bed. I did have a little dog at the time, but my dog was a little dog and she couldn't jump up on the bed, and she was not long enough for her to be able to stand on her hind legs and get her feet up that far on the bed. There was no way that my dog would have been able to do it. So yeah, something touched me as I was lying on my bed. Now, this next thing that I'm going to tell you about is probably the most terrifying thing that happened out of all of these things that I'm going to talk to you about today. And it didn't even happen to me. It happened to my son, he's 23 now, but at the time he was 4 years old when this happened to him. I remember that we were all in bed. It was in the middle of the night. And I got up to go to the bathroom. And to get to my bedroom, you had to walk through my two boys, they shared a bedroom. Well, now I have 4 boys now, but at the time I only had 2 boys. So I had to walk through their bedroom to get back to my room. So as I left the bathroom to get to my room, my 4-year-old son was lying there in his bottom bunk bed, like just looking terrified. And I said to him, "What's wrong?" And he said, "Where's Dad's head?" And I said, "What?" He said, "Where's Dad's head?" I said, "What do you mean, where's Dad's head?" He insisted that he called it a dad head floating around in his bedroom with a branch through it. I don't know if this is what it looked like. This was just the closest thing that I could come up with. Although I have to say that's not how I imagined it. He always described it as my husband's head with a branch going through it. And I have to say again, he's 23 now, and he insists to this day that it was not a dream. He insists that it is something that he 100% saw. And I believe him because of everything else that happened in that house. I mentioned this to a friend, and they asked me if I thought that maybe it was a premonition about my husband. Thankfully, it doesn't seem to have been, because again, this happened like 19 years ago, and my husband is thankfully alive and well today and has never had a branch go through his head. I do believe that it was demonic activity, though, and I do believe that, it was interacting with my family. And this isn't something that he just suddenly forgot. You know how like you forget a dream and a lot of times like all the details will go away and eventually you just stop thinking about it? That's not how this was. It was very vivid in his mind. For years, he talked about the dad head. Like everyone in our family, even my children who were born after this, they know about the dad head because he used to talk about it. Even when he was older, he talked about the dad head. It made that much of an impression on him. So compared to that, my own experiences in this house seemed pretty benign. I did not see anything like this. And for a 4-year-old, he took it extremely well. Because as a 4-year-old, if I would have seen something like that, I would have been screaming. But moving on from that, we're still in this house. I was in the shower once again. Children are at school. 2.5-year-old is in her crib sleeping because that was the only time that I could take a shower was if she was not running around. And I got out of the shower and there was a handprint on the bathroom mirror. It looked just like this. And again, someone said to me, well, I have to say that it was, now that I think about it, it was a child's handprint. And I remember telling again someone about it, and they said, well, could your son, my oldest son was about 10 or 11 at the time. They said, could he have, put his hand there before, and then from the mirror getting steamed up, the handprint just showed up again later. But the mirror was placed high enough on the wall that he would not have been able to reach the mirror with his hand because he was very short. Most of my children are very short like their mother. And at the time, yeah, he was very short. There was no way that even he would have been able to put his hand on that mirror. And it's not something that I had ever noticed before. It was just that one time I got out of the shower and there was a handprint on the mirror in the steam. Another incident with the shower was I was taking a shower, got out of the shower. All of a sudden, my neighbor is in my house and told me that my back door was standing wide open and my dog had run out into the yard. And so they were bringing my dog back in the house. And so I didn't have doors that easily opened. Somebody must have opened that door in order to let the dog out. And there was no one home with me other than my sleeping 2.5-year-old in her crib. So finally, by this point, I was just really freaked out. I was afraid to get up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night whenever I would have to and walk around the dark house to get there. I would be terrified. Just hair standing on the back of my neck. I just wouldn't want to leave my bedroom at all. And so I finally decided, you know what? I'm just going to talk to the neighbors about this. So I went out front and a bunch of the neighbors were standing outside because they used to stand around and talk all the time. And so I went up to them and I started telling them about the things that were happening. And they all looked at each other with just these knowing smiles. And one of them said to me, we were wondering when you were going to say something. And I was like, what? And they proceeded to tell me that that when the house was empty, they always used to see an old man looking out of the third floor window. And I have to remind you that my third floor was the bedroom that my two daughters were sleeping in. That was the bedroom where the crib was moved. Not the crib, where the dollhouse was moved into the crib. So, and this is not the house. This is just, I'm just got all stock footage for these photos. But they used to see an old man looking out that window when no one was living in the house. And in fact, my landlord lived right across the street from me at the time, and his wife was one of the people I was talking to. And that was when she decided to tell me that their daughter had been living in the house for a while, and she was complaining about the same sorts of experiences. And I was like, well, thanks for telling me. Just like with my mom, I don't know why these people chose. Well, I do understand with them. They wanted, income for the house, so I can understand that. But yeah, I apparently was not the only one who had experiences there, and the neighbors who didn't even live there had their own experience just from looking in the window. So, the very last thing that I remember happening in that house, there might have been more things, but this was shortly before we decided to move out. Um, and I have to say that we didn't move out because of the activity. We really didn't. We moved out because my brother offered us to live in his house for like half of what we were paying there. So that was why we actually left. But anyway, right before we moved out, again, it was nighttime and I woke up to use the bathroom and I smelled what smelled like a match when you blow it out. It just smelled like something burning. It was just that burning match smell after you blow it out. And so I decided that I was going to look around and make sure that nothing was on fire. So in the middle of the night, I'm like walking around my house. I even went down into my laundry room, which was in the basement, just to make sure everything was okay there, and didn't notice anything there, and just went back up to bed and didn't think anything about it until the next day. My children were outside in the yard with me, and all of a sudden, these detectives came up to me in the yard and told me that a neighbor had confessed to breaking into our basement the night before. And he stole my husband's hunting rifle and held up a diner down the street with it. I had no idea. So all I kept thinking was, at the time that this match smell prompted me to look around the house, including in the basement, they were down there getting my husband's hunting rifle. And I was thinking, I could have been seriously hurt if I would have caught them. And so now, as I think back on this, I'm thinking, was it trying to lure me down there? Is that what the objective was? Because I actually did think about, well, could it have been the people who broke into my house? But I don't think them lighting a match all the way in the basement, I don't think that smell would have carried up to the second floor back bedroom. I really don't. So again, I think that it was definitely related to the rest of the activity in the house. And so I always wonder, like, what is it that causes certain people to have these experiences and then other people never do? And I did mention that some people are just more intuitive, more perceptive to these things. Um, but I will say that there are a couple things in my childhood that I think might have opened the doors, unfortunately, to this. One of these is that when I was a child, and I have to say, I did not grow up in a Christian home. They were nominal Christians. So it's kind of like you go to catechism classes and you have to go to church in order to get confirmed in the church. And it was kind of a tradition. But like my mom, she never went to church unless it was like Christmas and sometimes Easter. And my dad was an atheist. So I was not raised in a Christian home. So my best friend and I, we actually, one of our parents bought us a ghost hunting book. And we used to have little amateur ghost hunts all the time, actually. And we would sit and we would read this book together. And I remember one time we pressed record on a tape recorder and we left the room for like an hour or so and came back and there was a voice on it. And we both think it was her sister. Her sister says it wasn't her, but I think that it was her. But just the fact that we were doing that, I think could have brought something in because our houses were very old. The houses that we grew up in were about 200 years old when we were living in them. And that's why I would caution everyone today not to get involved in any of these ghost hunts because you do not know what you're hunting and you do not know what you're going to bring back with you. My late sister actually went on a ghost hunt with Taps from Ghost Hunters on the Sci-Fi Channel, and she even got to meet Josh Gates from Destination Truth. He was along with it. And I mean, I like Josh Gates. I loved the show Destination Truth. But I said to her, "What are you doing? You should not be doing that." But she did. Anyway, and then as a teenager, my parents bought me a Ouija board. And again, they didn't think anything of it. They just thought, oh, this is fun. And at the time, I thought, oh, this is fun. So my friends and I used to play with the Ouija board, and nothing ever happened with it. We just thought it was funny, and we just used to goof off with it and everything. And I used to actually be upset that nothing happened with it. I was always kind of disappointed. But I can't help but wonder, could this have also opened up some sort of door that kind of made me vulnerable to these sorts of things? And thankfully, the things that I experienced were pretty benign compared to what it could have been. But this is something else that I tell my children, stay far, far away from things like that. And I wish that I would have had that sort of guidance when I was growing up. And I'm not going to necessarily blame my parents, because if they had known the truth about the Ouija board, they definitely would have said to me, stay away from it. But they didn't. They just looked at it as a game. And unfortunately, that's what I thought of it as well. One interesting thing, though, is that since becoming a born again believer, and that happened about 3 years, almost 3 years, after moving out of that house, I have not had any experiences like this since then. So it's been about 15, almost 16 years now that I have not had any more of these, what some people would call supernatural experiences. Now, I'm not going to say that born again believers never have these experiences, because I'm sure that they do. But I firmly believe that I have the added protection of Christ, and that it is keeping me away from having any of these activities going on around me. Because again, I'm going to say it, I do not believe that any of these beings were once people. They were once Nephilim, sure. This is demonically related. So yes, they could very well have once been Nephilim. But they're not people. Anyway, that's just what I wanted to share with you today. I don't have any answers to what happened to me. I just wanted to relate it because I thought it was really important to come out as a Christian and say, look, these things 100% happened to me. And just because we do not have an explanation for them right here and right now does not mean that they're not happening. And we shouldn't write people off because it makes us uncomfortable. No, we don't make ourselves look good like that. We don't make God look good like that when we will just blow off the experiences of people. It's important that we address this. And it's important that even if we have to say it, we just say, I don't know, but it happens. That's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one either here or over on Instagram. And if you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.